Again, I got Mike Dankler here with Michael Best Strategies. We're talking politics and federal Congress delegation, waxing philosophical, if you will. As I indicated there, I mean, again, it's hard when you're looking at those elections. I think there's a general sentiment from many people out there that Congress perhaps doesn't do anything, doesn't get anything done. And I'm speaking, both Senate and House. So the question becomes for a lot of folks, do we continue to have them not do anything or work slowly as to not hurt us? Or are we better off, again, passing pieces of legislation? You indicated many pieces of legislation over the last couple of years, some with some really good things in it that, you end up going back and fixing. I've spent, 28 years lobbying in our state here, and certainly we pass a lot of pieces of legislation where we come back and say, well, we didn't see that, we'll fix that, we'll do this, we'll do that. That's kind of part of the sausage making process. But, I think most of us in our states are one more step removed from the DC side, where it's like, okay, what is actually being done back there? And so I think it can be a challenge for the public to kind of see what are we actually getting done, right? And anyway, it's always interesting for me to kind of look at how that works. Mike, what other policies are you seeing are going to play a big role? If you reading the tea leaves or looking at your crystal ball over the next 6-9 months to a year, what do you feel like is going to be big issues we're going to be looking at?
Yeah, I think, in divided government, there's probably a smaller universe of things that are in the realm of possibility to get done, right? So, there has been this push on permitting reform. Democrats want to get it done partly as Joe, that was part of the deal with Joe Manchin to get the Inflation Reduction Act done. But part of it also is just to, make sure those products are actually getting approved and not just languishing for years and years on end because of, whatever reason, some group files a lawsuit or whatever. So, and that's something Republicans have been talking about for a long time too. I mean, every time Republicans retake the majority, they say, all right, let's do some permitting reform, let's cut red tape. And it's a lot more maximalist than what Democrats would want, but maybe there's a middle ground there that could be sown. It seems like right now the conversations are bogged down because I think Joe Manchin just kind of wrote his bill, didn't talk to anybody, Republican or Democrat, and just said, here it is, take it. And everybody said no. And so, maybe they go back to the drawing board a little bit next year. And, it's not to say it can't happen still this year, but, that could be something that's worked on. But otherwise, I think what you're going to see, especially in the early part, at least in the House side, is going to be a lot of oversight. Republicans will hold, the one important thing about flipping a chamber is that all of a sudden you have the gavels and you dictate what the committees do, what they talk about, who gets called. And so they're going to leverage that power because that's a new thing that they have that they didn't have before. So I think that's really going to be a huge priority on the front end, is to, go back and look at, they've talked about all sorts of things, whether it's Afghanistan withdrawal, president's COVID response, on down the line, and including Hunter Biden's, laptop. And so they'll have to be careful not to kind of go too far, and kind of stay in that realm of, good oversight, not kind of going down rabbit holes and things like that. But I think that's especially kind of in that more medium term. I think that's another thing you'll see a lot more of, just especially because there's fewer things that can pass. This is something you can actually do. Another thing I think you might see some oversight on is ESG and some of those things too. That's, again, with fewer levers at your hands, you can shine a light on some of those things, and I think that's going to be something you could see, and this is me just kind of speculating, but you could see companies get called out for some of those things. So there are some risks and pitfalls for companies too. I think they won't just say, why aren't we drilling more? Why was Afghanistan botched? But I think they could also be saying, what are companies doing on ESG, and what does ESG mean, and what how does it all fit in, and everything else. And so I think that's what I see in kind of that short to middle term, at least in the beginning of part of next year.
What obviously one of the areas that we've spent a lot of time on as an organization, and both in DC and at the state level, is talking workforce. And certainly we have a drastic challenge right now, a shortage of workforce. Our state been under 2% unemployment for the last year, and increased jobs, net increase of manufacturing jobs, and a net importation of jobs. Do you see us able to do anything on immigration?
That is a $1 million question. It's one of those things that always seems so close to getting done, and then something just comes along, and usually it's the A word, amnesty. Right. And I do think some of the border, the southern border, I mean, I think that's going to make it very tough to get something done until people feel like there's something,
right,
that it's contained, and that that there's more sensible policies being put in place. That was the last time that there was really a major push. I don't remember the year exactly, but Republicans had kind of a 4-phase plan, and step one was secure the border, and that was when things were still relatively, you could say, in control. But now it's just so out of whack. That's something you're going to have to contend with right away if you're going to try to get Republican votes. There are different bills out there. There's, we work on clients in the agriculture industry, and there's a huge farm worker, shortage. And so there's various pushes to get those bills done, but you always run into that. Okay, what do you do with all the people that are already here? How do you contend with that? And it's very easy to just, whatever you do, however many years they have to wait, however many fines, or, whatever they have to pay to ultimately attain a green card or citizenship or anything, it's easy to just say it's amnesty. So that's the problem we run into. I think that Congress is trying to do some things around around the edges on like apprenticeships and things like that. That's helpful, but obviously there's a lot of different things that need to be part of that, and immigration is one of them. So to the extent that they can do any of those things, it's good, but immigration is probably a tough road to hoe. Even in light of, especially in a divided government.
Yeah, we've been talking about it for a long time, and I would agree with you. It feels like we've gotten close a number of times, and it shouldn't be as difficult as it is, but it's obviously a highly emotionally charged issue, and as you know, those types of issues take on a life of their own and become much more challenging. So maybe one last discussion item, Mike, is a lot going on in the news right now on a potential railroad strike. And certainly we're watching that very closely, as the rail system in the country is a massive component of manufacturing and movement of goods and products. Thoughts on the position that President Biden is in, and what may happen with that discussion on a rail strike?
Yeah, that's been something we've been watching very closely. We have a number of clients who say, no, that doesn't impact us. And then we say, well, what about this and this? And they're like, oh yeah, actually that's pretty bad. And so it's one of those things you don't think about until you think about it, from commuters to freight to everything else. And so, I think obviously we had the marathon negotiating session back in mid-September to avert a nationwide strike. Again, there's 12 unions. If one of them strikes, they all strike. So very, very high, high risk there. And so what we saw in the last, maybe 24 hours was very interesting, though, I thought. So, we're recording this on Tuesday, but I think today's Tuesday, right?
Right.
But President Biden said, we can't get a deal. There's four unions rejected the tentative deal that was negotiated in September. Congress, you got to act, and Congress can act. And so, obviously the president's not going to say that unless he's coordinated very closely with Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Schumer. And so, and they came out with statements shortly thereafter and said, okay, yep, we're gonna impose, Congress can impose that September agreement that was voted down on the unions that voted it down. And so it sounds like the House may vote tomorrow morning. And then, the Senate, I think the way the Senate scheduled itself is all sorts of crazy. But I think the soonest they can get to it is probably next week, which is running up against that December 9th, Friday, December 9th deadline, but would put that threat to bed if it passes. So very interesting that, President Biden and the statement he put out said, I've been the most pro-union president, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very interesting that he took that step in this early. They didn't let it go down to the wire. They just said, these negotiations aren't going anywhere. They just said, Congress, go ahead, which I thought was very telling. And so we'll see what happens. It's been very interesting tracking Twitter, and who's been saying things. So Bernie Sanders obviously says, no way, but you've seen Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz saying, I don't know about this. And so could be very interesting Senate vote, could be an interesting Republican House vote as well, because progressives and Democrats, they may need this, strange bedfellows coalition of, business-oriented Democrats and Republicans who, just want to be Republican, this is kind of maybe more of a relatively easy vote for Republicans. But yeah, you could end up with some strange bedfellows to get this across the finish line. So that'll be very interesting in the coming days to see how that all shakes out.
Which, to your point, again, if Congress passes something that potentially shoves the agreement down the throats of the unions, what's the impact of that in 2 years in an election? What do the Democrat voters feel like? What do union voters feel like that at that point about the president and about a Congress that perhaps it's just, again, for those of us that are looking down the road in this realm, I'm very interested in getting this thing put to bed, and not having a rail strike because of the effect that it'll have on manufacturing companies across the country. But I'm also almost as interested to see what were to happen with that as voters come down the wire and look at things. Now, again, the voting public's memory is fairly short term, and so potentially that doesn't necessarily play, but it would be interesting to watch union voters look at something that perhaps was pushed them in a direction they didn't necessarily want to go.
Yeah. And lurking just behind this rail strike is the West Coast dock workers as well. Those negotiations aren't going too well. How's that going to play out? There's some tricky times coming up here.
Yeah, it's just fascinating again and again. I know for our companies, I would just reiterate that while this may not be your favorite topic, this might not be something that you get excited about. The phrase of "get into politics or get out of business" comes to mind. You indicated you've got clients that are that way, and I often say that to our member manufacturing companies that all of these things have an impact on your business and how you proceed and what you do. That House Ways and Means Committee is a big deal. And whether you're a small 50 employee manufacturer in Utah or you're a very large manufacturing company in Ohio, what happens within the Beltway has an impact on you. And so you perhaps don't have to love it, but it behooves you to know what's going on. And that's why we certainly appreciate Michael Best Strategies and Mike being with us today. Michael Best Strategies, great partner of UMA, great supporter of ours, both here in Utah as well as across the country. And Mike, we certainly appreciate you being with us today. Any finishing thoughts or anything you wanted to express to the folks that are watching this?
Well, I'll just double table, in closing on your comments where, it'd be very nice to be able to just tune out everything happening out in Washington, D.C. and pretend like it doesn't matter, but it does. And so I think that's also, something that's very important. And I can say personally, having been on the other side of that, is making sure you're talking with your members of Congress, building relationships, having them out for a site visit or, having them talk to your workers. That's just hugely important because that just always, weighs all the more importantly, it localizes an issue, makes sure that it can raise something that maybe wasn't on their radar up to their radar. It's just important to build those relationships and make sure they know what's on your mind, because they ultimately need that feedback, and that can help them on their votes, or it can help you get some policies enacted as well. So I guess we can close on that note and just say, make sure you're getting to know your senators, and I mean state and federal, because that does matter. As a former staffer, I can say that does matter. That feedback matters. We'd check in with businesses and say, hey, we're voting on this. Yes, no, what do you feel about this? Well, how does this impact you? It just is so helpful to have that Rolodex of companies you can call up when something's coming up for a vote and say, what do you think? So I'll conclude on that note.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. We do a trip out to DC every year and put in a plug for us. If members of ours want to participate in that, we always go out and spend time with our delegation. I'll give you a call when I come out. Let's grab dinner and catch up on some other stuff. If you want to get a hold of Mike, again, Mike Dankler with Michael Best Strategies. Mike, your email is mldankler@michaelbeststrategies.com. That's the best way to get a hold of Mike. And again, we appreciate their involvement with us as an organization. Appreciate your expertise and your thoughts from within the Beltway. I love DC. I love the process. Again, I'm a political geek. It's been a pleasure visiting with you today and kind of get some insights as to what's going on. You joined us today for Inside Manufacturing. I'm Todd Bingham, President, CEO of the Utah Manufacturers Association. Thanks for joining us. Remember, what Utah makes Utah.